Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of CSD and India International Center, I extend warm welcome to all of you to this 29th Durgabai Deshmukh Memorial Lecture. We have been organizing this lecture to celebrate the life and achievements of our founder, Durgabai Deshmukh. 15th July was her birthday, and we are organizing every year on this date since 1992. This has become a landmark event in the academic and cultural calendar of Delhi. People wait for this event to come. As we're going through a very unprecedented situation, we are doing this through webcast this time. We could not meet physically. So our spirit is a bit dampened, but something also has its good side, that this also gives an experience that we can use later on when we can have both physical as well as webcast. So more people can watch, people from outside Delhi and people from outside country. Now, Durgabai Deshmukh was no ordinary human being. CSD is only a part of her numerous creations. Those who are from Delhi might wonder why there is a metro station at Dholakua named after her. It is because she also established the famous Venkateswara College located next to it. She was a freedom fighter and worked with Gandhiji, went to jail for taking part in Salt Satyagraha. She saw pitiable condition of women prisoners and he thought of giving them legal help. Durgabai fought against the system of child marriage, dowry, and harassment of widows, which used to be much more than we can see today, in the name of custom. She herself was a victim of child marriage, as she was married to a cousin at the age of 8. But after she grew up, she refused to accept the marriage that happened without her consent. Fortunately, her parents also supported her. But look at the other side. When her former husband died, she extended her help to his widow. So she was such a human person. She was among the very few women who could be in the Constituent Assembly of India, which was in charge of drafting the Indian Constitution after India got freedom in 1947. After that, when government got moving, she pushed the government to adopt many social welfare programs. She also played a very important role in so-called Hindu code that was essentially for empowering women of India. She was made a member of the Planning Commission, which was a very coveted post, but she could not continue in that post for long because she got married to C.D. Deshmukh, who was also a member of the Planning Commission. So after that, she decided to resign from this post. Such was her level of integrity and, probity that you could think of. Very few people could show that kind of integrity even today. CSD, under her leadership, played something very important role in what is today known as ICDS, Integrated Child Development Services. Now, this is the world's largest childcare program anywhere in the world. So you can see what kind of role she could play. I can go on and on, but we have limited time. I would only say that she remains our inspiration that motivates us to do what we do. As I indicated earlier, we organize this lecture every year on her birthday to pay tribute to her and also to remind ourselves the ideals, the motivation that guided her. And we also see that those motivations also guide us. This year, we're fortunate to have Dr. Ashok Khosla with us, an eminent environmentalist and institutional builder for this lecture. He is pioneer in this field, not only in India, but in the entire world. But I would not describe him only as an environmentalist because doing that would be an injustice. His work on environment that has always been focused on social development of the marginalized people side by side with protection of the environment and preservation of natural resources. In the current context, we could not find a better person to deliver this lecture. He is the founder chairman of the Development Alternative Group, the world's first social enterprise dedicated to sustainable development since 1982. He developed a model where innovation by the non-profit DA and incubation and market delivery by the commercial affiliate Tara creates sustainable, scalable consumption and production solution that also promotes social development, particularly in rural India. And that's how, Dr. Khosla is so relevant for our activities. Earlier, he started his career with the faculty position in Harvard after doing his PhD there. But he became director of the Indian government's first environment office. So, the environment program of the government started with him. And then director of Infoterra in UNEP. So, in the old UNEP program also had his contribution. And more recently, he has been co-chair of the UN's International Resource Panel and did some remarkable job there. President of the International Union of Conservation of Nature, IUCN, as it is known. President of the Club of Rome, which played a very important role in making environmental issues mainstream. He was a member of the Government of India's National Security Advisory Board and Scientific Advisory Council to the Cabinet, and was awarded the Order of British Empire by the UK government. The UN's Sachakos Environmental Prize, UWI's Jayed International Environment Prize, WWF's Duke of Edinburgh Medal, and Award for Outstanding Social Entrepreneur by the Schwab Foundation. He has an MA from Cambridge University and a PhD in experimental physics from Harvard University. So he had got a very brilliant career, but he actually thought those are not worth pursuing. He thought of thinking about ordinary human beings, thinking about nature, and that's how he devoted his entire life, living his illustrious career in the US. We are privileged to have you, Dr. Khosla, as the speaker of the 29th Durgabai Deshmukh Memorial Lecture. Today's program will be chaired by Professor Muchkund Dubey, who is the president of CSD as of now. But he also has a very illustrious career. He joined Indian Foreign Service and had various postings in many countries as ambassador or high commissioner, but he also became the Foreign Secretary of India. And that is not all. He also was a full professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University, where he taught international relations courses. He guided many PhDs, and he has been in CSD, guiding CSD's activities as president for a long time, almost 2 decades. I will now request Professor Dubey to take charge of the proceedings and preside over the function. Thank you.
Thank you, Nitya. I think there is very little that I have to say at this stage, except to request Dr. Ashok Khosla to deliver this year's Durgabai Deshmukh Memorial Lecture. Dr. Ashok Khosla.
Thank you, Ambassador Dubey. I am basically trying to set up my Priya. Is my screen visible to everyone?
There's a little vibration.
Is it okay now?
It's okay now.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Dubey. I'm very delighted to be able to join you at this very, very honorable and honorific lecture for Durgabai Deshmukh, whom I have admired greatly for a large part of my life. I'm going to talk today a little bit about our country, the way it is, and the way it's going if we leave it to go in its present direction, or the way we might want it to be, and how we might get there. We've had 70 years of independent nationhood, and in that time, we made incredible progress in many, many different ways. People are living well, at least some of us are living extremely well. We have unlimited opportunities for acquiring things, for having beautiful possessions, for having elegant homes. We can travel a lot. In the last 30 odd years, we've multiplied our travel and our connectivity by factors of 100, if not 1,000. We are able now to talk virtually to every single citizen in the country with mobile phones, and everybody is a part, basically, of the modern world in one way or another. We eat well. This is a picture of a family in Ujjain in year 2005, and they brought out all the food that they eat in 1 week, and you can see they're fairly well fed, and we have people living in much higher levels of income, eating even better. So we have an India that gone from 1947 to 2020. It now has roughly 450 odd million people. It's a country that compares with any country in Southern Europe, and in fact, in virtually any developed country. It has a flourishing space program. It has technical universities, agricultural science. It is one of the top countries in the world for dairy production, manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, film. So basically, in many ways, India has made unbelievable progress. It's made huge improvements in human life expectancy, in improving our education, our agricultural science, and indeed, food and nutrition has been improved for quite a lot of people. You can see from this graph the number of millionaires, which is a truly exponential curve. I mean, it's quite remarkable that in the year 2060 or soon after independence, we probably had 3 or 4 millionaires in dollar terms, and today we have somewhere getting close to 1,000. It is a great indicator of progress in many ways. The sharing of India's income, well, in the 1990s, and this is a picture from the cover of the first Human Development Report in 1990, you had a champagne glass looking curve, which basically showed that 30% of the population was earning roughly 80-90% of its basic income. India's middle class today are global citizens. They are at home, not just in India, but in Europe, in the Caribbean, and cruise ships, and everywhere. And with access to resources from all over the world, they are actually what we would call biosphere people. They have essentially the ability to access whatever they want from all over the world. But what about the other 70%? The ones whose lives depend entirely on local resources, what we might call, whom we might call the ecosystem people. These are people who, many of them are hungry and undernourished, who have to walk daily for miles sometimes to get clean drinking water. 300 million of them don't even have access to it. They are able to fulfill their basic needs in the most primitive of ways in a country that is one of the most advanced scientific communities. They are people, 700 million or so, who live by and large outside the mainstream economy. Here are the Prajapatis of Bundelkhand. This is 1 week's worth of food for the entire family. This was in 2015. We took another picture of the Kumars in Tikamgarh, and that's their entire food for the family for 1 week. And this lady, she's got her children with her. You can see in here a person whose whole world is in that picture. And when you look at it, or at least when I look at it, I keep wondering, how many Lata Mangeshkars, how many Marie Curies have we lost because they never had a chance to get the kind of education that you or I had? We have a great loss to our country and our country's development because of the people that don't count. And our nourished and undernourished and hungry people, well, these are numbers from government statistics, But these are not in the thousands, these are in the millions. And as you can see, the numbers have been basically up and down, but mostly up. And today, after COVID, it may well be even worse. So here's Bharat. As distinct from the India that I showed you earlier, Bharat made it from 1947 to 2020 to be about 850 million people, probably. And their achievements, well, we've had a lot. The country's moved about 200 million people out of extreme poverty. That's how we got down to 850 million. Improved our agricultural income from farmers in different parts of the country. There's been some upward mobility, both into the city and in society locally. And there is access to some basic consumer products. But by and large, the people in Bharat live off the crumbs that might be available from the people in India. And here you have the poor, the people at the bottom, 60%. The people who get roughly 7 or 8% of the income of the country for half the people. So there is an extreme disparity and injustice and unfairness in our country, whose manifestations, whose symptoms in the political economy are, as you might think of them, as a societal disease from the economic choices that we've made, or it's a structural dysfunction of our political systems. I'm not here really talking about parties. I'm not talking about the Congress Party or the BJP. This is a national systemic problem. It doesn't really matter which government is running the show. If you end up with 800 million people after having had different parties rule that are essentially outside the mainstream economy, then you really have to figure out that we as a nation have political systems that are not working very well. And in fact, India is, in many ways, strikes me as being really just another colonial power within a colonial power. It's got the rich who essentially colonize the poor. The societal disease that I referred to, at the top end, there are two diseases. One is what we might call affluenza. This is a pretty nasty disease because it causes other people. It doesn't affect the person with the disease as much, as badly as the people around them. But it's a terminal disease. And the other societal disease is, of course, povertitis. And povertitis is a nasty terminal disease, and people pay a very heavy cost. Now, one of the things that's very interesting is that we live in a very fast-changing world, which is rapidly becoming fit more and more just for billionaires. And they live very well. But the reason is that we are basically hanging on to a science called Neoclassical economics, even though we don't like to say that we belong to that, where the value systems have led to all these problems. In Neoclassical economics, basically GDP is the king, and everything revolves around growth of that GDP. And if you read your newspapers, whether on the front page or on the business page, all it talks about is more FDI, more higher Sensex, more improving and raising the growth rate, how to bring in more money from foreigners, how do you go and on living like that? Well, Neoclassical economics has essentially been predicated on assumptions that don't really hold very good. It's based on a hit and run extraction of resources. And if you've got finite resources, you can't go on forever extracting them without running into some kind of problem. It doesn't believe in resilience. If we did, then we wouldn't be having the kind of massive disruption of our economy today that we've had, because it was never counted, it was never sought for. For neoclassical economists, growth in the exclusion of everything else is what's important. If something happens in between, sorry, am I on screen again? Hello? So in the 20 years between 1991 and 2011, the champagne glass actually turned into a bar stool. Now we don't talk about the 20 and the 80%. We talk about the 1% and the 99%. We're talking about people who essentially, at the very top, earn as much as the rest of the world put together. And this is basically leads to is a result of the neoliberal kind of policies that we've instituted, which promote more things, more consumption, more incentives to business, higher efficiency, less regulation, global markets, and of course, austerity for the poor. So here we've got India and we've got Bharat. In one, we've got privilege and plenty. In the other, we've got poverty and pollution. And it seems to me that we need to ask questions, why? And why is it that we have to put up with this? When you bring those two graphs together, the millionaires in the thousands and the undernourished in the millions, you can see that the country we live in is a grossly unfair place. Affluenza has now brought us influenza. Povertitis brings despair, alienation, and violence. And this girl, in a sense, is the archetype of the person that we need to think of when we make our policies. We say we have essentially a duty to make her life at least as good as anyone else's. Now, what is true of the world is also true for India, which includes the big issues of things like climate change, like endangered species, which are now going extinct at a fast rate. This is a particular flower which grows in Madagascar called the rosy periwinkle. And without it, you cannot have a drug for a child to cure childhood leukemia. So it's going rapidly extinct, and with it will go the cure. So we've got problems, poverty and environment, eco-refugees. There are crores of people on the road every year, millions losing their homes to advancing development of the forests and of their lands. And there's a breakdown of planetary life support systems, the ones that I just described, climate change, biodiversity loss, and so on.
Sir, sorry to bother you.
Yeah.
Can you please put on your PPT? Your PPT is not visible. You are not sharing your PPT.
I am sharing it, but I'll do it again.
Has gone off.
So how much did you miss? Let me see. Please warn me if something goes wrong. Now, is it sharing now?
Wasim, please check.
Not yet come, sir. Please share. Yes, now it's coming, sir.
So did I miss a lot?
I think 2 minutes, something around 2 minutes.
All right. So do you wish me to go back track a little bit?
Little bit will be good for the audience, sir. Thank you.
Let me just do a little bit more. I think I'll do it from here.
Yeah, that will be fine, sir.
Did you see this before?
I think this will be a good place to start. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I was saying that this is a woman whose whole world is in that picture. And what the country is losing is phenomenal talent, human talent, because they never have a chance to become full. The question is, how do our policies address the issues of people like that? Do these people count in our policies? Look at the number of undernourished people. If you haven't seen these, I think I'm going to show them to you. This is a graph in the millions, which basically shows that the number of people who are essentially in abject poverty, hunger, and undernourishment is in the 200 millions. Now, we have moved 200 million people out of extreme poverty. It's not that the country's been sitting back doing nothing. but there are very large numbers yet to be dealt with. And we basically have two countries which are living together cheek by jowl, who are essentially totally interdependent and yet totally different and living in different spaces. And the issues of the poor are extreme disparity, injustice and unfairness of a kind that none of us would accept. And the symptoms of that come through in the societal diseases from economic choices and structural dysfunction of political systems. I was mentioning that we suffer from these two diseases. One is called affluenza and the other is povertitis. And both of them are resulting from the choice of economic instruments and the policy instruments. The economic instruments are derived from neoclassical economics. Most self-respecting economists will say, no, we don't believe in neoclassical economics, but that's basically what this is all about. It's an economics in which GDP is king, which believes in more foreign investment, in growth, in increasing stock market prices, growth, improving the growth rate, bringing in more foreign money into the portfolios, and so on. And it's basically a hit and run operation, extracting resources from Mother Earth. It doesn't matter what happens when there's nothing left. Doesn't matter whether your systems are resilient, as we have seen just now with the COVID disaster, where because of lack of resilience, our whole economic system is partially collapsed. What did the future do for us is a question people ask. Why should we care about the long term? For most people in the economics profession, nature doesn't count. They may deny that, but there's no mention of it in their theories. And what about human happiness? What does that count for? So we have a lot of things in our economic theories which basically don't tie in with the way we live and the way we aspire to a better world. I showed you that champagne glass, which was in 1991. A period of 30 years went by. I'm sorry, a period of 20 years went by. And in 2011, UNICEF published this graph, which I call a bar stool. And the disparity, the income distribution of the world had changed from a champagne glass to a bar stool. The top 20 in 1990 were getting the bulk of share of the income of the world. And now it's the top 1%. So clearly we've got a problem. And that comes from the policies we've adopted, which are derived to some extent from neoliberal thinking. More things, more consumption, incentives to business to perform better, higher efficiencies, less regulation, global markets, very important. And of course, austerity always for the poor. So these are policies that have got us where we are. And where we are is not pretty because you've got a country, there are two countries in the same space and same time. One with huge privileges and plenty, the other with equally bad poverty and pollution. And they live together, partly living off each other, but mostly as independent countries. The graphs of millionaires and hungry people is very striking, and you can see for yourselves. One, of course, the red one is in the millions, and the green one for undernourished people, the red one is in thousands for millionaires, and the green one is in the millions for people who are hungry or undernourished. And you can see that we're not doing very well. Our affluenza has turned into influenza of a very nasty kind. Our povertitis has been leading for some time to despair, alienation, violence. Unfortunately, not enough violence from the people who got left behind. Now, it's not just poverty and extreme disparity that's worrying us. But we've got global issues that we've got to worry about. Climate change, biodiversity loss, extinction of species. There are people who are every day losing their land and their forests and their dwelling places and moving into cities or far away, literally in the millions every year. So there are really now breakdown of both societal and planetary life support systems. The societal diseases and the structural malfunctioning, dysfunctioning of society. I call them mindsets. These are the paradigms which have brought us to where we are. The first mindset is mine and plunder the earth as fast as possible. It is there to be subjugated. And this is the kind of landscape you will get. This is the kind of basic, massive destruction of our forests and our beautiful nature will lead to. This is caused by an excessive consumerism, and very little of it is really justified. The second mindset is what is mine, and what's yours is up for grabs. And the poor are there to do the work. So basically, we saw with COVID the fact that all these invisible armies of people hiding away we don't know where were actually working like slave labor. They were actually working only when they were required. They didn't get paid when they weren't working. And there are literally not millions, but tens of millions and hundreds of millions of them. And there, our ecological footprint is huge. It's growing, and today India needs roughly two Indias to support itself. And the way it supports itself is that it's running down the capital, the natural capital that it has had from the beginning. The third mindset, which may be a little unfamiliar to Indians because we don't do too much of it, but is a global phenomenon which will start striking us too, which is mine and bomb the natives until they give us what we want. Now, this mindset is actually in operation in many ways because we are actually mining resources in places that the local people are being thrown away from. So we may not be planting actual mines and bombs, but we're doing pretty well what happens when you do that. And this is not just an ecological footprint problem, it's a boot print problem. Because once the rich and the powerful get to have taste their wealth, then they start making it very difficult for everybody else to compete. So we've got to turn this ship of state around, and the only three ways that you can do that are to leapfrog, and to leapfrog by doing one of three things. One is charisma. One is the fact that, like a Lord Buddha or Mahatma Gandhi or St. Francis or whoever, you have someone who has such a presence that they help society actually see things differently. Here, Durgabai Deshmukh with Mahatma Gandhi is obviously discussing how do you bring about a new nation and make it a nation that will basically be good for not only all its people, but for all its natural heritage as well. The second way to overcome this is going through a crisis. It can be a war, it could be famine, it could be plague, it could be an asteroid coming at the Earth. But a crisis is a good thing to pull one's mind together and start focusing on real issues. And the third is collapse of finance. Now, these three C's that are essentially applicable to all of us, even to biosphere people, who don't realize that global growth without resilience doesn't make any sense at all. You can have huge riches in the bank, but if 1 gram of virus, which is all there is in the whole world, coronavirus, if you added them all up into one little thimble, you would get 1 gram worth, can actually bring the entire global economy to a grinding halt. What sense does that make? So we're in the Titanic. The Titanic is heading for an iceberg. In fact, there are many icebergs ahead. And these include rampant poverty, climate change, species extinction, water scarcity, phosphates, ecosystem collapse. In fact, many, many icebergs. And we've got to now change direction and possibly all the way back, 180 degrees, because anything more like another COVID-19 experience, and the world is going to be in very bad shape altogether. Now, I personally believe that COVID-19 didn't break the system. It simply exposed how broken the system was. And that is one thing that I think we've really now got to realize, that tens of crores of people who trudged home shoeless and penniless, and some of them didn't even make it home, were there not simply because of COVID, but because the whole system had preordained that this would happen. And it's not just COVID. Just in the last 6 months, in the last 3 months, we've had intrusions from outsiders, from locusts, from cyclones are coming in from the left flank, super cyclones coming in from the right flank, all kinds of armed forces coming in from the northeast. We've got real problems. And if our economy isn't designed to be able to handle these, clearly you're going to be in a problem. And we've got to understand that this crisis is a time that we've now got to build a totally different society, a society that is just and resilient and sustainable, and is concerned with the well-being and prosperity of every single citizen. Now is the time to solve our social diseases and the systemic rut that we had got into. The normal that was pre-COVID is no longer possible. You know, we in the name of efficiency and spreading trickle-down wealth, we rationalize these neoliberal economies. Based on growth obsession, we had this neoclassical economics. But frankly, they don't work. Today's vision of development is based on violence. Violence against people, violence against nature, and violence against cultures. And it locks us in. It locks us in. When we build roads and we build dams and we build highways, airports, we're locked in for decades, if not for centuries. And all future generations will pay the costs of what we are doing to them. We are scarring the landscapes. We're leaving behind deserts. We're making virtually everything scarce. Even sand, one of the most abundant materials, is now the business of mafias because it's not available. And we've got to learn to live together around the world. We've got to have a nation that works with other nations to make the world a better place. Now, post-COVID, we will be needing new solutions. That business as usual doesn't work. So what we're going to do is have to think through how this little girl is going to live in a world that is adequate for. We're going to ask the question: what is national development? Who is it for? And how do we get it? What are the alternatives? How do we create an India that is both inclusive and sustainable? Well, we've got to define what it is that we want. We want an India that has healthy, fulfilled people. It has plenty of drinking and irrigation water. It has good, healthy, regular, nourishing food for every single citizen. It has shelter and secure tenure. It has healthy people. It has individual development. It has participation of everyone. It empowers every single citizen. It ensures personal security, not just for a few, but for everybody. It is a country where people count. Whether they're poor or they're rich or they're in the countryside or in the city, all people count. Of course, the economy also counts. And we've got to look after and use the natural resources we were endowed with, our manufacturing facilities, our services and trade and investments. All these are just as important. But so far, these are the only things that have been important. And of course, there is the whole question of governance. Now, our country has paid a very heavy cost for lapses in governance. And I am very proud of my design here, which I believe says it all in one graph, which is Lena and Dana. Corruption is one issue that we all have to, every single one of us, have to now get rid of. Probably the most important single thing that counts is jobs. Jobs of all kinds, modern jobs, traditional jobs, jobs for people who have only little time to spend every day working. Whatever it is that we need jobs. And we need to conserve our nation's assets, natural assets. Our forests, our rivers, our wetlands, our soils and land, our environment, our built environment, and our cultural heritage. In fact, we've got to nurture all kinds of capital, not just financial, but human and physical, and particularly something we forget all the time, natural. So we've got a UN developed idea on how you could do this. These are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals to which India is a subscriber and a signatory. And they're well thought through, and many of them are very useful. And I believe that if our policies were in tune with these goals, we would be a much happier country. But I'm going to bring it back to us. Gandhiji gave us the basic idea of what a better future looks like. And it was his talisman. And what he said was that just every time you have to make a decision, just think of the poorest person that you can think of and ask whether it would be good for him. It's Antodaya, putting the last first. And for me, this girl with her two little brothers, the one in the lap and the other one, are representative of the image that I have when I think I want to make a decision, and I wish every government would have the same. Now, sustainably, we have to invest in solutions for nature, for industrial ecology, and we do that in many different ways. I show you this picture because it's the photograph of my organization's headquarters in South Delhi, Development Alternatives, and it is a highly ecological building. It's very elegant. People want to rent space in it who can afford the best buildings in Delhi, and yet it's made almost entirely out of recycled materials and industrial wastes, from fly ash, from power stations, from stone dust, from mines, from construction and demolition waste from earlier buildings. And you can see that with savings of something like 40 to 60% of water, of material, of energy, this is a very different approach to technology. Now, finally, I want to come to Durgabai Ji's contribution to the world. She was, for me, two things beyond almost anybody else. One was her commitment to the empowerment of women, and she recognized that literacy was a key factor in that. And I am very proud to say that my own organization is a leader in literacy, in women's literacy. And we've devised a remarkable product called Tara Akshar, which uses extremely sophisticated techniques like morphing letters like this. All the letters of the alphabet can be morphed into objects women can recognize, like T for tomato and G for gajar and so on. And they are able to learn within 56 days how to read, write, and do arithmetic, literally within 2 months. And so far, we've taught almost 250,000 women in northern India to read and write Hindi and do a simple arithmetic. And we are very happy to be able to have been able to contribute to what Durgabai was totally committed for. The second thing she was committed to, as were all the fighters of the independence, including the Mahatma, was not only a clean government sector, starting with the community and delegated upwards, not only with a trust-based business sector, but they were all totally committed to an active civil and voluntary sector, which provided support to citizens through a large number of different services. This, unfortunately, is being forgotten in our country today. The phenomenal response of civil society to COVID-19 has provided concrete evidence of the strength of NGOs in our nation, of the value that they bring to our nation, and the reason for more, not less, support to the voluntary sector. And I believe that today, this is one of the most important things a government can do, which is to bring citizens in as partners, not as enemies, but as partners for doing what is needed to make the country a better place. Without selfless work of NGOs, many of our fellow citizens would never have got home. And they need more support, not less. So, as with Durgabai Deshmukh, I want to say that a healthy, happy, and prosperous India, now and in the future, can only be got if this little girl is the reason why we do everything. So please, be the change that you want to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashok, for an excellent lecture. It is very relevant. You have really described in considerable detail the present situation in the country, the root causes behind this situation. And typical of you, you have gone into some detail, the measures that should be adopted for bringing about a change in this present situation. I'm saying typical of you because you left a very important life of a scholar, a researcher who had excelled in his academic achievements to come and work for the poor in India. You were the first to set up an institution for the for making things easier for the poor in their occupations, in their jobs. You went into the various things that are done in the rural areas. You devised technologies yourself, very innovative technologies, and even brought them to the market. And you have been doing it throughout your life. It's a career of great sacrifice, achievement, and a career which has a vision and a mission. And this is very well reflected in the lecture that you have given today. I'm sure we are going to benefit immensely from it. As you have very rightly pointed out, one of the main causes of the present situation is the kind of policy that we have decided to follow, mainly towards the latter part in the post-independent period, and particularly since the 1990s. This is a policy of neoliberal economics, and a lot has been written about it. For me to go into these things, when I'm supposed just to make a few comments in your speech, would be diverting too far away from what I'm supposed to do today. But I will just mention one or two things which you have also mentioned, but which we have experienced in what we are doing in the CSD, and what I have myself been particularly interested in. And these are, firstly, the reliance on the market forces and the gradual withdrawal of the state from all the activities which are in the ought to be in the public domain. And as a result of that, the collapse and virtual decay and disappearance of institutions that were created in the earlier part of the post-independence period. Institutions in the form of good schools for children, good hospitals in the public sector, and so on and so forth. These have allowed to disappear, and the poor have now nowhere to go. Whatever little facilities were available for them has been taken away or withdrawn one by one. So this withdrawal of the state from the activities which essentially belongs to the public sector. Second characteristic is that, as you have very rightly pointed out, lack of regulation. And this lack of regulation results in harassment of people, poor quality, unreliability of what you get and what you do not get. And I mean, for example, the government has now issued a document called New Education Policy. And in this document, it has shown great opposition to the little bit of regulation that was sought to be brought into the education sector by the Right to Education Act, and particularly the provision in it for providing some minimum norms in this sector. They don't want these minimum norms. As it is, these norms are very few, hardly a small percentage of what you see in the developed countries. And they say that this is obstructing this kind of progress, this is coming on the way of this is coming in the way of investment, and so on and so forth. So the new education policy goes in for, I mean, it is basically against norms, and you can realize what kind of a new policy it will be, which is against even applying norms for the behavior of the agents of production and distribution in the economy. And so basically, they are against norms, and they say that regulation should be by way of the schools themselves putting up on board what they are doing and what they are not doing. And the third thing that we have experienced in the CSD, and myself particularly, as I have been devoting a lot of time in the last 10 years or so to the field of school education. And it is this notion of relating social sector investment to growth in GDP. I mean, even some of the most respected economists have been coming out with this proposition from in season, out of season. And when there has been really growth in the GDP, there has been no commensurate growth in the attention paid to the social sectors. And when it is pointed out that such and such policy should be adopted, then it is said that let's wait till we have a high rate of growth. So this is other phenomenon that we have found. I think that you have, at the end of your speech, tried to tell us what we should do. And they are very appropriate. As I pointed out that you have been a person who has never been satisfied by doing things merely at the conceptual and theoretical level. You have felt restless to get down to the field and experiment with things there, bring out new things, innovate, and all geared to the needs and requirements of the poor, and make them available to the poor in whatever way it is possible in the present scheme of things. Finally, I would like to conclude by saying that there has not been real investment in the sectors that count for the growth, prosperity, and progress of a society. And that is education, first and foremost, and then health, or both of them together. So this is what has happened in our country. And the second thing is that I mean, we had recently the phenomenon of lack of demand. And when one came to think of creating demand, it was not realized that tremendous amount of demand can be created. Huge sums of money can come to the pockets of the ordinary people if the long postponed needs in the health and education sector are to be met, sort of entirely, preferably, but at least, substantial. And I will leave with this, and I thank you once again, Ashok, very much for this lecture, which I found extremely stimulating and very practical, and very much based on the reality on the ground that has prevailed in the country since our independence. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, may I request Professor Manoranjan Mohanty to propose a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Professor Dubey. Thank you for your remarks, which were really insightful and reinforcing the main argument of Sri Ashok Khosla. Dr. Khosla, this was the most befitting tribute to the legacy of Durgabai Deshmukh. In 1964, she started the study group which set up.
It's 17
the
hours.
CSD. And her main objective was to focus on social development, health, education, social welfare, because she already noticed that the focus on economic growth was going to have this kind of scenario, and we take away your great formulations, affluenza causing influenza, poverty-titis causing violence. And when I first heard the title, I thought it was a typo, mindset. But indeed, you talked about mindsets, mining the earth and plundering, exercising control over mind, that is, appropriating everything. This is mine, and I appropriate yours. And the third one is equally interesting, the mine and bomb the nature. Fantastic formulations. Dr. Khosla, the takeaway is that COVID has only exposed these great inequalities, unsustainabilities. And we cannot afford to go to the pre-COVID situation and restore normalcy. It has to be changed, and you ended with that. My only fear is that the elites will continue to restore the old neoclassical and neoliberal policies, and the struggle is going to be even more intense than before. And we have to carry on the legacy of Durgabai Deshmukh to continue to fight for the values that she stood for and our constitution has underlined. Thank you so very much. And we expect the text of your lecture very soon so that we carry it in the next issue of Social Change. As the editor of Social Change, this is my sincere request. I thank the staff of IIC, particularly Tete, the program director, and her staff, Nishant and others. I thank our director, Nityananda, administrative officer, Sila Sabo, and the staff. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Professor Dubey, for your leadership. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. So, with this, we come to the end of this lecture. And well, I once again want to thank Dr. Khosla for agreeing to deliver this lecture and delivering a lecture which is so befitting our founder, Dr. Durgabai Deshmukh. Thank you.
Thank you.